Because today, that's our foreign policy and national security challenge is China, Russia, the authoritarian states. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Romney. Senator Kaine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Nathan, I join Senator Romney in saying I think the country is fortunate to have you in this position at this time. My colleagues have asked a number of good questions. I really want to focus on Latin America, but to illuminate some issues that aren't just Latin America-based, but using Latin America as an example. You referenced, and I think Senator Cardin did in his opening comments, the fact that you are limited in where you must prioritize investments by the World Bank classification of countries by income. You should prioritize lower middle income countries, and you need a waiver to invest elsewhere. There's only 5 countries in Latin America that meet the World Bank category, and they are, let's see here, Bolivia, El Salvador, Haiti, Honduras, Nicaragua are the only 5 that fit within those World Bank classifications. Now, by waiver, the DFC is involved in other countries, Peru, Brazil, Ecuador, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Colombia, Mexico, but you have to get a waiver to do that. Russia isn't worried about World Bank. I mean, China is not worried about World Bank classifications. They'll make investments wherever they think they can advance their interests. So in the current setup, we have at least put a hurdle in your way. And as I travel around the Americas, what I hear again and again from some of the nations that aren't in the 5 is, we're your friends, we're doing things the right way, we can really advance more quickly, be a good example in the neighborhood, hopefully abate some of the migration pressures, but you limit investments in our country and China doesn't. So talk a little bit about the limitation and the waiver process. Is the waiver sufficient? Or if you, as you contemplate reorganization, what suggestions would you have to Congress in this space?
Thanks so much for the question. Under the BUILD Act, to do transactions in an upper middle income country, you're right that we need a waiver from the president that it is in the economic or national security interest. That's been delegated to the State Department. We've spent a lot of time negotiating with the State Department to try to create exemption pathways for certain categories of investments so that we know in advance that we can do deals in upper middle income countries that are in those sectors. Or
so you don't have to go down the road and
for every single deal.
Right.
That is working. It's why in the last year Ecuador became the second biggest exposure for DFC in our whole portfolio globally.
This port investment that you talked about.
It's a port investment. It's a hospital investment. It's a power deal. It's the largest debt for nature swap in history that will help Ecuador by reducing debt to help them deal with economic coercion, and also provide funding for conservation activities and the enforcement against illegal and unregulated fishing in the Galapagos. So we've done a whole series of transactions. It's partially because we've had a government who's been a great partner and a president there who's been fantastic. He's leaving
Sadly.
office soon. Yeah. But Ecuador, I think, is a good model for where it's working. But you're right, it's still friction in other circumstances.
Do you think the waiver process is sufficient to give you the tools that you need? Because again, as I'm traveling in the region, I'm hearing, wow, we wish, China doesn't have these restrictions. We wish you were a little less restrictive in this space. I completely get why BUILD would have prioritized the countries of the greatest economic need, but there are other imperative values as well.
So the waiver process is working, but is not perfect, and also creates in the areas that aren't in the exemption pathway a significant sort of time delay and administrative and just work, a hurdle.
Let me give you an example. The chairman and I met yesterday with the president-elect of Guatemala. Guatemala is not on the 5-country list. He won a surprise election on a very aggressive anti-corruption campaign. I think the U.S. would have a lot at stake in seeing his efforts succeed when he is inaugurated in January. But right now, Guatemala might not get the national security waiver or might not be able to demonstrate an absence of private capital, and yet it would be in the security interests of the United States for an anti-corruption government in the Northern Triangle to be successful. And so I would hope, I said this to the chairman yesterday. I sometimes think we spend a lot more time figuring out ways to use sanctions to punish enemies than we do figuring out ways to reward good behavior. And the DFC is one of the areas where we can reward good behavior, and I just hope that the restrictions in place don't make that unnecessarily challenging, especially vis-a-vis China. I'll yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kaine.